Hey guys, tonight we're waking up in a hut made of mud and straw on the edge of a whispering Nile. The reed mat beneath you is damp, your back is stiff, and your first thought isn't about breakfast. It's whether the river rose just enough or a little too much. A frog croaks from a corner beam. Your wife's already on and your eldest son just stepped on a thorn barefoot because, well, you only have one pair of sandals and you're wearing them. Welcome to your life as a farmer in ancient Egypt. And no, farming in ancient Egypt was not what you think. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely endorse what I do here. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is as you press play. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch, or at least try to, before ducking under the doorway beam and stepping outside. It's not even dawn yet, but the sky already glows faint orange over the palms. The river glistens like an animal still half asleep. The first birds are calling to each other in crisp, echoing bursts, and far off, someone is already beating a cloth against stone. You sigh, the day begins. You're in the heart of the Nile Valley, Upper Egypt, technically, though the irony of up being south hasn't escaped you. Geography was never your concern. That's the scribe's job. You're just here to survive. The first breath you take is thick, hot mud, animal sweat, in the smoky ghost of yesterday's cooking fire. There's a sweetness too, like fermenting reeds, or fig wine someone spilled and forgot to mourn. Your muscles remember what they're supposed to do long before your brain does. And thank the gods for that, because your brain is still half asleep and worrying about three things. 1, did the Nile rise enough for planting? 2, will it rise too much and flood your field again? And 3, are your neighbors going to report you if you let your irrigation ditch run a bit longer this time? The Nile, they say, is generous. They also say the Nile takes what it wants. Some mornings it takes your fence posts. Other mornings, your dignity. Historians still argue whether the annual flooding was more of a predictable gift or a divine dice roll. But for you, it's everything. You don't check a weather forecast. You look at the height of yesterday's water line and hope the priests weren't lying about this being a good omen year. You kneel to wash your face at the edge of the canal, and a tiny leech says hello. You flick it off. It will probably come back. You know this game. There's no formal alarm clock, but the temple bell echoes down the valley a few moments later, and that's your cue. Crops won't plant themselves, irrigation canals won't unclog themselves, and oxen, well, they won't walk without grumbling. Much like your children. You grunt, awake the older boy, send him after the tools, and try to convince the younger one not to eat raw barley again. Your wife hands you a flat cake of yesterday's bread and a chunk of fermented onion paste. It smells awful. You eat it anyway. As the sky turns gold, you glance at your field, a patch of life cradled between death, desert to the west, desert to the east, and you stuck in the middle, held here by the pulse of a river that doesn't care if you exist. But still you try, because this is what your father did, and his father before him. And some nights, you swear you still hear him mumbling about ditch angles in his sleep. You shoulder your hoe, nothing fancy, just a bent stick and some copper lashed on with leather. You'll spend the next 10 hours listening to its rhythm against soil until your palms blister and your spine bends and you no longer know where you end and the dirt begins. On lucky days, your field yields wheat, barley, emmer, lentils, things that can fill a stomach or pay a tax. On unlucky days, it yields pottery shards and the occasional snake. Today, you're praying for wheat. A neighbor passes by, hauling a bucket with a shoulder limp you've seen in your own mirror. You nod silently. No one speaks this early unless absolutely necessary. It's an unspoken pact. Words waste water. Later, the village scribe will come by, standing tall and shaded in linen, looking down at your mud-slick back with a stylus in one hand and a spurk in the other. You'll nod again. He'll nod. And then he'll write something that determines whether your family eats in 6 months. But for now, there's just the sun rising. A golden coin you'll never hold. A sign that it's time to start moving. You exhale. You adjust your linen kilt. You put one foot in the mud. And just like that, the day begins again. You carry your plow like a curse. It's nothing like the gleaming modern blades you might picture. This one is basically 2 wooden sticks lashed together, crooked as your uncle's promises, and the copper tip, if it hasn't fallen off again, is duller than your youngest child's sense of self-preservation. You jam it into the soil with all your weight behind it, hoping it'll catch just enough of the earth to break the crust and let in the Nile's memory. Your ox doesn't care. He's not really your ox, to be fair. He belongs to the estate, or technically to the temple, or possibly to a noble who's never stepped in mud. It's unclear. What's very clear is that he's old, stubborn, and farts like a demon when annoyed, which is constantly. You named him Seneb, meaning healthy, in the desperate hope he might stay that way. He has not. Today he steps sideways, yanks the plow with him, and nearly takes your shoulder out of his socket. You mutter something impolite under your breath. He pretends not to hear. This is farming in ancient Egypt. Not rows of grain waving golden in sunlight, but back pain, splinters, and a war of wills between man and beast. You brace the plow again, angle it downward, and start dragging a shallow furrow. The soil here is rich, Nile silt, black and clumpy, perfect for planting if you can beat it into submission. But the top layer's drying fast under the sun. If you wait too long, it'll harden into something not unlike pottery, and good luck growing anything in that. The air is already heating up. Your linen kilt sticks to your thighs. There's a gnat hovering near your eye, and somewhere someone's child is crying because he fell in a canal. Again, still, this isn't the worst part. The worst part is how fragile all of it is. 1 week of too much sun and everything wilts. 1 surprise flood and your seeds washed away. 1 ox illness and suddenly your entire planting schedule collapses. Historians still argue whether ancient Egypt's farming system was brilliantly adapted to the Nile or foolishly over-reliant on a single flood cycle. You have your opinion, and it involves swearing. Every now and then you spot a tiny broken pottery shard in the dirt. You toss it aside. Some of these are ancient, older than pyramids, older than your ancestors' ancestors, which is wild, considering you're already living in what some future nerd will call antiquity. But back to the plow. It squeaks every 3rd pull. There's a rhythm to this kind of work. Dig, drag, lift, turn. The arc of your body over the field creates a kind of music, one without joy. But it keeps time, and that's something. You count furrows like other people count prayers, hoping that if you say them all correctly, the gods will notice. Not that the gods are out here, they're represented on amulets, painted walls, temple columns, but they don't exactly show up when your ox has diarrhea or your field floods in the wrong direction. That's what the temple officials are for. Divine middle management with impressive wigs and very little dirt under their nails. You pause to wipe your face. Your hand comes away streaked in sweat and grime. You haven't even started sowing seed yet. That's a whole other process, and it's going to involve a basket, a lot of walking backward, and a prayer that your kids don't throw half of it at each other while you're distracted. Speaking of kids, your second son comes running up, barefoot and panting. He's holding a wooden scoop. He points at the irrigation ditch behind your plot. It's clogged again. Of course it is. You leave the ox to contemplate existence and head over. The ditch is half full of leaves, sludge, and something that smells like fermented fish. You sigh. You grab the scoop. You start digging. It's here, bent over a mud trench in the sun, that you begin to think about how unfair it all is. You plant the food. You dig the ditches. You fight the ox and the weather and the mold. And what do you get? A couple of flat loaves, a jug of gritty beer, and a tax bill written in hieratic script by a man who's never broken a fingernail. Back when you were a kid, your grandfather told you that farming was honorable work, that Pharaoh himself depended on the fields, that even the gods admired those who fed the nation. You believed him until you realized he was mostly trying to stop you from running away and becoming a fisherman, which in hindsight might have involved fewer leeches. Still, you can't help but feel a flicker of pride as you clear the ditch and watch the water flow again. Slow and brown and full of promise. You return to your plow. You pat Seneb's side. He farts again. You sigh again. Dig, drag, lift, turn. This is your world. You don't own a calendar, not really. What you have is a sky that whispers instructions and a river that decides whether or not to listen. Back in your hut, pinned with a fishbone to the wall, there's a scrap of papyrus with 3 words inked on it in messy hieratic, Akhet, Peret, and Shamu. Those are your seasons: flood, growth, harvest, not spring, summer, fall, not anything a weather app would recognize. And they don't start in January either. They begin when the Nile says so. This morning, a heron flew upstream ahead of schedule. That's either a sign of an early flood or a very confused bird. Your wife muttered a prayer to Happy, god of inundation. Your eldest marked a line on a pole with a charred stick. And you just adjusted your ditch angle by a few degrees, because honestly, birds aren't great meteorologists. Still, the ancient Egyptian calendar was one of the most advanced in the world for its time. Historians still argue whether it emerged from pure astronomy or was cobbled together by panicked priests trying to time festivals to the river's moods. Either way, it worked, sort of. It had 12 months of 30 days plus 5 mysterious extra days tacked onto the end for chaos, birthday parties, and ritual dread. Today falls somewhere in Pere, the season of emergence. The floodwaters have pulled back, leaving behind a strip of dark, nutrient-rich mud. Kemet, the black land. That's the good stuff. The gods' compost. You and every farmer from Aswan to the Delta are out there with your baskets and seed and aching backs, racing against time before the sun bakes it into crust. The pressure's not just environmental, it's cosmic. According to temple doctrine, your planting must align with certain star patterns. Sirius, the star you call Sopdet, rises just before the flood, heralding the new year. Your father used to wake you before dawn just to stare at a pinprick of light and whisper, "That's how you know the gods are watching." Which sounds poetic until you realize he said that every year, and it rained frogs once anyway. Your day unfolds like this. First, water management. You open or block canal paths using clumps of mud and palm leaves, trying to coax the Nile's gift across your fields without drowning anything. Then you grab a seed basket, usually slung across your chest. You walk backward, barefoot, flinging handfuls of emmer wheat or barley in a wide arc. Your youngest, barely 4, runs behind you giggling, his job to shoo away birds. It's adorable until he trips in the mud and throws seed into a drainage trench. You curse, but only a little. The gods might be listening. Every so often, an overseer walks by. He doesn't farm. He carries a baton and a very shiny wig. He pretends he knows how deep to plant lentils, but you saw him last week trying to pull a turnip that turned out to be a rock. Still, he works for the estate steward, who works for the noble, who reports to the pharaoh. So you smile and say, "Hot sun today, yes?" And he says, "Too much water in your northern corner." You nod like it's a useful insight and pretend not to notice he's sweating through his linen. Lunch comes around, not because it's noon, you don't know what noon is, but because your stomach growls and your wife shows up carrying a reed tray with bread, pickled radish, and yesterday's beer sealed in a gourd. She sits on a rock and fans herself. Your second son is asleep under a fig tree. Your ox is chewing on something that might have once been a rope. You share a joke about how the priests keep promising favorable signs this season, while their own gardens mysteriously grow on the highest ground. You chew your bread. It's dry. Your teeth hit a bit of sand. Again, one of the dirty secrets of ancient farming is that the grain often got mixed with particles of silt during the threshing process. You've been grinding your teeth down for decades now, and you know the sound of enamel cracking by heart. Still you eat, because you're not here for pleasure. You're here for survival. You spot a flicker of movement in the corner of your field. A jackal, a neighbor's dog. You squint, just wind maybe, or a god passing through. Evening draws near. You and your sons gather the seed baskets, pat the ox, who farts again, and begin walking back home. The sun bleeds out over the horizon, casting long shadows behind every plow rut. The fields are silent. Your back is not. You pass the house of a fellow farmer. He's sitting outside sharpening a sickle. He raises a hand. You return the gesture. No words needed, just mutual understanding of a life ruled by stars and mud and timing no one really controls. Back in your hut, you mark another line on the post. The calendar isn't hanging on your wall, it is your wall. And tomorrow? Tomorrow it might rain, or flood, or nothing will happen, which is somehow worse. You'll adjust. That's what you do. Because this calendar doesn't care about birthdays, it only cares about crops. The Nile is calm this morning. Too calm. You wake to a hush, not the gentle rustle of reeds or the squawk of ibises, but a stillness that prickles the back of your neck. Something's off. You step outside, bare feet landing in wet earth, and glance toward the canal. The water is gone. Well, not entirely gone. It's there, just lower. Pulled back like it's holding its breath. You run, not full speed, you're not young anymore, but fast enough that your knees complain and your breakfast sits heavy in your gut. You reach the embankment and see it, the Nile, receding fast, exposing the glistening, sucking flats of river mud. Fish flopping in confusion. Crabs scuttling sideways like they heard bad news. You drop to one knee. You dig your fingers into the mud. It's warm. Wrong. And then, just as your heart begins to slow, you hear it. A distant roar. It starts like thunder but builds, fast and feral, until it's all you can hear. You scramble back, slipping on the bank, yelling for your sons, your wife, anyone within shouting range. The Nile is returning, not with grace, not with poetry, but with violence. The annual Eke, the inundation season, is here to swing. You manage to gather your family. You retreat up the stone rise where the temple goat grazes. You watch as the river foams and swells and devours the path, the irrigation ditch, the outer fence, and of course, your tools. That new basket? Gone. The polished hoe head you borrowed? Missing, probably halfway to the delta by now. Historians still debate how much control the Egyptians had over these floods. Some claim the basin system, with its dikes and canals, showed advanced planning. Others argue it was organized chaos, an act of ritual endurance dressed up in math. You've seen 3 floods in 10 years wipe out entire villages. You lean toward chaos, but you also know this. No flood means no food. The Nile must rise. It must carry silt and nutrients and fish and frogs into your fields, or nothing will grow. Still, it could do without washing away your laundry. Later that day, the priests arrive. They wear white linen and carry incense, parading down the road with their heads high and sandals dry. They chant praise to Hapi, the Nile god, as if he's listening. Maybe he is, but if he is, he's being a bit dramatic about it. One priest sprinkles something that smells like cinnamon and garlic into the current. Another releases a wax figurine into the water. You hear murmurs that the flood level will be auspicious. You want to ask how auspicious it feels to lose your cooking pot, but you keep that thought to yourself. By nightfall, the waters settle. Your home is damp but intact. The ox has climbed onto a crate and refuses to get down. You wring out your tunic and count your blessings. One of them is still chewing on a turnip core. You're not sure how she found it. You don't ask. Over the next few days, the village transforms into something both beautiful and horrifying. Fish swim in puddles next to sleeping dogs. Children float on reed mats like they're tiny wet pharaohs. Frogs sing. The mud stinks. Your neighbor constructs a makeshift bridge out of broken baskets in prayer. You follow suit. You don't pray, but you've got extra baskets. And the pests come with the water. Leeches in your drinking pot. Mosquitoes the size of olives. Flies so numerous you're not sure they haven't formed a religion. You once saw a crocodile less than 50 paces from your doorstep. Your cousin swears it smiled. You believe him. There are worse things than crocodiles, though. Last year, a family down the river got caught by the second surge, the lesser-known flood that sometimes follows the main one. Their hut collapsed. The father was found 3 days later tangled in papyrus. His wife still leaves offerings by the riverbank, a handful of lentils, a cracked flute. Your son asks if the gods are angry. You don't know how to answer. So you say they're cleaning and hope that sounds wise. You spend the next week rebuilding what the river rearranged. You remark your fields, poke holes in the newly laid silt to test its depth, and dig channels like veins across the earth. The mud sticks to your calves like a second skin. It doesn't come off, even in sleep. You keep a sharp eye on the water. You can't trust it. It pretends to be your friend. Then it ruins your pantry. But it also leaves gifts. One morning you find a clump of lotus blooming where your fence used to be. Another day, a carp the size of your forearm flops into your pail. Your wife laughs for the first time in weeks. There's a balance here, a rhythm. You hate it. You love it. It's not fair. It's also the only thing that works. And when the river finally settles, when it exhales and pulls back just enough to reveal your planting ground again, you sigh, take off your sandals, and step in, right into a leech. Again, you don't get a paycheck, you get a visit from the scribe. He arrives with a reed pen tucked behind one ear, and that self-important walk of someone who's never hauled manure but thinks he knows how much wheat your field should yield. You try not to roll your eyes. He's holding a scroll, a small abacus, and the most dangerous thing of all, authority. This is the part of the year when your stomach knots tighter than your netting rope. Because while the pharaoh might sit on a throne gilded in lapis and gold, you pay for it, not in coins, in grain. The scribes call it taxation. You call it what it feels like, agricultural ransom. There's no courtroom, no arguing, just the field inspector, the scribe, and occasionally a temple rep who says he's only observing, but somehow always ends up making suggestions that benefit the temple. You bow, you smile, you point at your field and mutter something hopeful about locusts and poor soil quality. The scribe squints into the sun, looks over your field, and makes a few quick notes. Then he does something truly awful. He guesses. Based on average yield and expected productivity and what the other guy gave last year, you could have double the weeds or half the oxen, and it wouldn't matter. If your number is higher than last year, congratulations. You've just been upgraded into a higher tax bracket. Historians still debate whether this taxation system was strictly exploitative or just an inevitable part of managing such a complex agrarian economy. You're not a historian. You're a man who just handed over 3 sacks of barley and watched the scribe make a mark you didn't understand next to your name. And here's the real kicker. They don't even take the grain with them right away. No, they give you a deadline. You have to store it yourself, in a granary, in clay pots, in baskets under mats, until collection day. Which means now you're responsible for keeping it dry, pest-free, and out of reach of children, dogs, and divine rodents who couldn't care less about Pharaoh's coffers. You remember the last tax season when a neighbor's storehouse collapsed under its own weight and half his wheat fermented. The scribe called it loss through negligence. The penalty? 2 more sacks. You tried to defend him. The priest said, "The gods help those who prepare." You wondered if the gods had ever patched a roof in the rain. Speaking of gods, they're not exempt. The temples also get their cut, what they call offerings, which is just tax with incense. You have to send a portion of your yield to the temple granary, usually with a note attached, with gratitude for divine favor. If you don't include the note, the priest might say your wheat is ritually impure, which is priest speak for "we don't want to bless this one, but we'll still take it." Back at your hut, your wife is measuring out the usable grain with a carved scoop. Your kids are trying to chase a chicken out of the barley pot. You snap, and the youngest trips over the boy and crashes into the corner jug, spilling 3 days' worth of emmer on the floor. You freeze. Everyone freezes. Then slowly, your wife picks up the scoop. You start brushing grain into a basket, each kernel a silent prayer. You'll tell the scribe you had mold. You'll fake a cough, anything. Just don't let them think you're hiding it, because they will come check. One evening you heard shouting 2 huts over. The overseers had accused a farmer of stashing grain beneath his bed. Turned out to be true. He'd buried jars in the floor. Smart man. Didn't help him. The jars were confiscated. He got fined and assigned a corvée labor, forced to dig canals for 2 months with men who didn't know a hoe from a hippo. You see the scribe again 2 days later. He checks your sacks. He makes another mark. He doesn't say thank you. He does ask if you've seen any signs of mice in the area. You say no. He doesn't believe you. That night, you dream of a golden grain basket that fills itself endlessly while you nap under a fig tree. When you wake up, your roof is leaking. Your ox has wandered into the canal, and you've got a tick in your ear. You sigh. You pour another cup of sour beer, take a bite of onion, and squint toward the river. Somewhere far beyond your hut, Pharaoh is building another temple, maybe a pyramid. You'll never see it. But your barley might, which is almost poetic, in a here lies my hard-earned wheat in someone else's tomb kind of way. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, they might raise your quota, or maybe they'll forget you exist. One can hope. You finally harvest a good yield, not a miraculous, story-worthy harvest. No divine light breaking through clouds, no geese laying golden eggs, but a solid, respectable haul. Enough barley and emmer to fill your war granary and make your wife crack a real smile. That kind of harvest. And that's when half of it disappears. Not all at once, not like a fire or a flood. No, it's more bureaucratic. The estate workers arrive with papyrus scrolls and wax seals, and suddenly your full baskets are expected contributions. You nod. You sign something you can't read. You watch your best grain vanish into sacks marked for Pharaoh's share or temple reserve. And those granaries, they're huge, towering structures of mud brick with sloped ramps and narrow entryways that feel less like storage and more like labyrinths designed to keep your food just out of reach. They smell like mold and sour onions. You once saw a cat disappear into one and never come out. You wonder if it became the guardian spirit of spoiled lentils. You follow your cart up to the collection ramp, dragging it through soft dust and goat droppings. Inside the granary, the clerk takes one look at your load and says, "Too light." You want to point out that his scale is crooked, but you also want to keep your teeth. Historians still argue whether the state-controlled grain distribution was a triumph of central planning or just a fancy form of theft. From where you're standing, it feels a lot like robbery in slow motion. Once inside, your grain is poured into shared pits or silos, where it mingles with everyone else's, good or bad. You don't get credit for your quality. If someone else stored moldy wheat last week, congratulations. Now your batch smells like a wet tunic left out too long. You ask the clerk for a tally of what's been recorded in your name. He scrawls a symbol that might mean 7, or acceptable, or don't ask again. You thank him anyway. Back home, your own modest store is smaller than you hoped. Between temple offerings, taxes, and the mysterious losses during inspection, you're left with just enough to feed the family, assuming no rats, no rot, and no surprise guests from the noble's estate asking for samples. You try not to take it personally, but then your cousin comes over, eyes wide, breathless. He heard that the royal court had a feast last week. He says they used barley so fresh it still had your cousin's handprint on it. You laugh, then you stop laughing because that sounds about right. Still, you have a plan. You take your best sacks, the ones not already leaking, and tuck them in the back of your hut, up on a shelf out of reach of dogs and toddlers. You mix the top layer with bitter herbs to discourage thieves, both human and mouse. Your wife ties a bundle of charms near the opening, shells, beads, and one dried frog foot. You don't ask where she got it. Later, a priest from the nearby temple visits. He brings incense and a gentle smile that hides a very sharp eye. He's here on behalf of the gods. which means he's here to ask for donations without saying the word tax. You give him a small sack. He says, "The gods see your devotion." You don't respond. You're not ungrateful, truly. The granaries protect you during drought. When a season goes bad, and it will, you'll stand in a ration line with everyone else, hoping your previous contributions mean something. Sometimes they even do. But right now it feels like your work feeds everyone but you. That night, your youngest daughter wakes you. There's a rustling near the grain store. You grab a torch and slip outside. A jackal, or maybe just a hungry dog, bolts into the darkness. You chase it off, check the baskets. One's been gnawed through. You patch it with palm rope. You sigh. You promise to dig a pit tomorrow, store the rest underground. You return to bed, lying awake as the wind shifts through the shutters. You think about your grain sitting in the state granary, distant, anonymous, and probably hosting a rat banquet as you speak. You wonder how much of it will ever come back, and when, and whether you'll still have teeth by then to eat it. There's a myth that you work your own land, that your little field, patched together with elbow grease and irrigation ditches, somehow belongs to you. That's adorable. The truth? You're part of a state-run agricultural collective, whether you like it or not. Sure, you live in a hut next to a field your grandfather plowed. You plant the same barley, mend the same fence, curse the same rocks that keep rising from the soil like vengeful ghosts. But don't let the routine fool you. Your farm isn't just yours. You're in a co-op of sorts, a forced family operation under the eye of estate officials, tax collectors, and occasionally the temple. And your colleagues? Well, they're your cousins, in-laws, and that one angry widow who keeps muttering about the time your son's goat ate her laundry. You tried to fence off your corner once, just a modest row of woven reeds. It lasted 2 days. Then someone tripped over it, claimed divine insult, and borrowed half your beans in penance. You sighed, you folded the reeds into baskets. You never tried again. Your cousin Beck comes by every other day. He insists the planting rows should face east for better sun karma. You tell him the sun rises either way. He doesn't laugh. Neither does his wife, who recently moved her family into the half-collapsed hut next to yours. She says the walls smell like history. You suspect she means mildew. Then there's Horam, the old-timer with one good knee and a permanent scowl. He doesn't speak much, but shows up with a spade and just starts digging. He claims he once met a goddess disguised as a scarecrow. You believe him, mostly because he smells like he hasn't changed clothes since that meeting. Managing the work schedule among this chaotic bunch is its own full-time job. The younger kids plant too shallow. The elders insist on chanting between rows. Your wife wants onions planted close to home for quick access. The temple official says onions should never face a shrine. You don't even know what that means. Historians still argue whether these collective farms were cooperative villages by design or just enforced labor arrangements dressed up in familial loyalty. You think it depends on how many cousins you have. One day there's an argument over oxen rights. You and Beck both need the same ox to plow your adjoining fields. It's technically the estate's ox, but you've fed it more, trained it better, and once nursed it back from a leg infection with nothing but honey, spit, and bad advice. Beck says it's his turn. You say over your dead body, the ox promptly sits down and refuses to move. Eventually, the temple sends an arbitrator. She listens patiently, nods slowly, and decides the owl will be used by someone else entirely, a new arrival from the north. Neither of you are happy. The ox, however, seems thrilled. He hasn't worked since. You can't really store tools separately either. That sickle you found last month, gone the next day. Your neighbor insists it was blessed and carried away by spirits. You later find it in his cousin's hut being used to cut firewood. You say nothing. You borrow his sandals in revenge. Balance restored. But here's the strange part. In this barely functional mud brick chaos, things get done. The seeds go in, the furrows get dug. The harvest gets reaped. And on festival days, when the work stops and everyone drinks sour beer and dances like they've never touched a plow, there's a brief flicker of something warm, something like community, or possibly sunstroke. One evening after a long day of replanting a section flattened by a goose stampede, yes, again, you sit on the shared stone wall and watch the sun dip behind the palm trees. Beck tosses you a fig. The widow nods from her doorway. Horam hums a tune no one else remembers. And for a moment, this mess of overlapping fields, confusing tool swaps, petty arguments, and unsolicited farming advice, it feels like it's yours, even if it isn't. Even if tomorrow someone rearranges the ditches again because the stars said so. Even if the temple reclaims its land. Even if the state calls your harvest national surplus. Tonight the fields are quiet. The air is thick with warm dirt and fig blossoms. Your children are sleeping. Your ox is finally off the roof. You sit there in the fading light and think, at least the goose didn't come back. Your third toe is bleeding. Why? Because a goose bit it hard. And not just any goose, but one of the sacred ones, those sleek, honking nightmares kept by the temple. Technically protected, practically feral. It started when your daughter tried to pick some wild herbs by the canal. She bent down and out of the reeds came a squawking cloud of feathers and rage. She screamed. You came running. The goose didn't flinch. It stared you down like a divine tax collector with wings. You tried to shoo it away. It bit you, right on the foot. Now you're limping home, clutching a handful of nettle and trying not to curse in front of your kids. Again, you always thought locusts would be the worst. And to be fair, they are pretty bad, especially when they arrive in clouds and leave your barley fields looking like Pharaoh's laundry, stripped, gnawed, and pitiful. But geese? Geese are personal. Sacred to certain deities, these creatures roam temple grounds, canals, and occasionally your own yard. Killing one? Absolutely forbidden. Yelling at one? Frowned upon. So you deal with it. You patch your foot with crocodile dung paste, allegedly antiseptic, allegedly, and try not to think about how your life is ruled by feathered chaos. But the pests don't stop at geese. There are the locusts, of course, buzzing in like a plague on wings. You've seen a healthy field turn to mulch overnight. One year, the swarm was so dense you couldn't see the sun. You remember watching them crawl over each other in a chittering blanket of hunger. The overseer blamed poor irrigation discipline. You blamed the keys. Quietly. Then come the mice. Not the cute ones from children's stories. These are twitchy, hungry, ceaseless nibblers who know how to chew through baskets, walls, and your patience. You caught 13 in a single night last winter. Your wife started naming them just to cope. When Nefertiti finally met her end in the grain pot, it was a moment of both sorrow and triumph. And don't forget the mold, a slow, creeping enemy that doesn't arrive with a shout but with a smell. You open a sealed jar of barley and are greeted by the unmistakable stench of damp rot and regret. You beg the gods for dry weather. They give you fog. Historians still debate how well Egyptian farmers protected their harvest from pests. Some argue they used clever granary designs and natural repellents like mint or garlic. Others say it was just a never-ending battle, with most farmers losing more than they dared admit. You lean toward the second theory, especially since garlic doesn't stop a goose. And then there are the human pests, the ones who borrow tools and never return them. The cousin who accidentally replants your lentil rows with onions. The temple boy who insists the canal is communal, even though your shovel dug it and your back still hurts. Add to this the occasional plague, and not the divine storybook kind. We're talking dysentery, boils, and that one year where everyone's hair fell out and the priest said it was because someone had offended Sobek. Your neighbor swore it was the goat sacrifice gone wrong. You swore off figs for a month just to be safe. Today, it's not a plague, it's just everything. Your second son has a fever. Your wife says it's the dust. You nod. You've stopped trying to name the illnesses. If it doesn't knock you over, it'll probably go away on its own. Or it won't. Either way, you still have to sow the next row. But there are funny moments too. One afternoon, a stampede of temple geese crashed through your field, squawking and flapping and sending Beck flying into the canal. Your children laughed so hard they cried. Beck emerged with a lotus flower stuck in his hair and a look that said, "I will never speak the make of this again." Or the time your toddler was found chewing on a dry dung brick like it was a sweet cake. You screamed. Your wife screamed. The child just smiled, gums coated in whatever alchemy was happening in that brick. The next day, she had the best nap of her life. You consider it a minor miracle. And what about the time a goat climbed onto your roof and refused to come down? 3 days it stayed there. 3. You named it Raw Jr. because it greeted the sun before anyone else in the village. It's not all misery. Some days the pests leave you alone. The wind is soft, the canal flows evenly. Your ox doesn't fart directly at your face. Those are good days, precious days. You try to bottle them in your memory like honey in a clay jar, because tomorrow might bring another goose. And if it does, you're not above throwing a sandal, sacred or not. You eat like a king, a very, very hungry, possibly malnourished, extremely flatulent king. Breakfast is bread, not the fluffy, Instagram-worthy kind. This is dense, flat, and often filled with more sand than flour. That's not poetic metaphor. You actually chew sand. Your grinding stone is imperfect, and every batch of flour carries a little extra grit. It wears down your teeth year after year until eating feels like dragging your gums across limestone. Still you chew, because you're hungry and because there's nothing else. You wash the bread down with beer. Yes, beer for breakfast. Not the fizzy stuff in chilled mugs, but a thick porridge-like brew with floating chunks of mashed grain and yeast. It's warm. It smells like yesterday's socks. It's also safer than Nile water, which is currently home to frogs, algae, and something you're pretty sure has scales and legs. Lunches, more bread, maybe some leeks or onions if the field's been kind. If you're lucky, there's a salted fish so dry it shatters when bitten. Your kids gnaw on it like it's candy. Your wife says it builds character. You say it builds jaw pain. Dinner? Guess. It's still bread, maybe with a smear of sour goat cheese if the neighbor's animals were cooperative. Maybe with a sprinkle of crushed dates if you traded well at market. And always more beer. It dulls the hunger. It helps you forget that your stomach hasn't felt full since last festival season. Historians still debate how nutritious the ancient Egyptian peasant diet truly was. Some argue it provided steady calories through grain and legumes. Others note the shockingly high rates of tooth decay, arthritis, and chronic anemia found in farmer skeletons. You don't need a skeleton to tell you you're tired. You've been tired since age 9, and yet you endure. Somehow. You grow your own food, but you don't own enough of it. The best parts go to the temple, the estate, the granaries. What remains is enough to live, barely. And when harvest is poor, you cut your bread thinner. Water down the beer. Pray the kids don't notice. When someone in your family falls ill, and someone always does, you go to the healer, not a doctor, because those are for nobility. You go to the neighbor woman with a basket of herbs and a scroll of cures that smells like mildew and sandalwood. She applies a poultice. She chants a few words. She ties a clay amulet to your wrist. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you end up with 2 problems instead of 1. Your eldest daughter once got a rash from hauling muddy reeds. The healer prescribed goose fat mixed with crushed scorpion tail. You weren't sure if it was for healing or revenge, but the rash went away, so you called it a win. Other times you turned to magic. When your second son had nightmares, your wife hung a carved ivory hippo at the foot of the bed. When the barley mildewed, you buried a tooth from a mummified cat in the southeast corner of the field. When your ox refused to move, you whispered its true name at dawn, given to you in a dream by a bearded man with 3 fish for feet. You don't question it, you just try anything, because you can't afford illness. Not here, not now. You joke sometimes that onions are your medicine. And it's only partly a joke. You eat them raw, boiled, pickled. You rub the juice on bug bites. You slice one open and place it under your nose when someone faints. You once offered one to a passing priest during a heat spell. He called it an insult to divine senses. You called it lunch. In the evenings, when the wind cools and the sun softens, your family sits outside and shares the last meal of the day. Bread again, beer again, but also laughter if you're lucky. You tell stories about days when the fish were easier to catch. The wheat grew taller and no one's donkey ran off with the neighbor's laundry. You watch your children gnaw on bread with half-broken teeth and half-heard legends, and you hope deeply, foolishly, that it'll be better for them, that the fields will be kinder, that maybe one of them will marry into a better hut with fewer mice. And you keep chewing, always chewing, because here in ancient Egypt, you don't live to eat. You eat to work, and work never ends. It's not just about dirt and seeds, it's about omens. You don't plant without permission. From the skies, from the temple, from the strange dreams your wife keeps having about talking donkeys. Farming here isn't just labor, it's divine negotiation. And you're not the one holding the pen. Take this morning, for instance. You're ready to sow lentils. The weather's right, the soil's damp but not soggy, and your second son is finally old enough to throw seeds without also eating them. Perfect conditions. But then a heron lands facing west. Your neighbor gasps, the widow next door spits 3 times over her shoulder. Your cousin Beck mutters something about a warning from Thoth. You pause, sack of lentils in hand, suddenly unsure if this bird just ruined your entire season. So what do? You walk quietly, humbly to the temple, where the priests have a dedicated calendar, access to the sacred lake, and most importantly, a spreadsheet of omens written in stars and bird guts. The high priest, face serene, wig flawless, listens as you explain your bird problem. He nods, consults a papyrus scroll, squints at the horizon, then announces, "Today is not favorable for lentils. Try okra. You don't even like okra." Historians still debate whether ancient farmers truly relied on omens or whether these rituals were layered on top of practical knowledge. You suspect both, you know your soil, but you also know that planting during a cursed alignment has consequences, mostly social ones, like people whispering that your crop failed because you mocked the ibis. Worse still, the priests can interfere directly. If they declare a ritual cleansing for a nearby field, no one can farm for 3 days. You once watched a priest pour milk, honey, and powdered resin into your irrigation canal to chase away drought demons. It clogged the water flow for a week. The drought stayed. And then there are the dreams. People take dreams seriously. If your wife dreams of a serpent eating grain, it's a sign to bury a chicken foot at the southeast corner of your plot. If your neighbor dreams of 3 suns rising, it means war or taxes or both. Once your daughter dreamed she was a frog, the village elder said she had the soul of a future canal engineer. You're still waiting on that career development. You've had dreams too, vivid ones, of fields ripening instantly, of barley turning to gold, of oxen that speak in riddles. You never tell anyone. Some dreams are best kept close. And what about the stars? The rising of Sopdet, Sirius, is more than an astronomical event. It's the Nile's clock chime. Priests watch it from observation platforms, timing the year's first flood like clockwork, except it's not always exact. One year they announced the flood was coming early. It came late. Another year they said it would be mild. It flattened half the village. You've since learned to trust your own feet in the mud more than a man in eyeliner pointing at the sky. Still, you don't take chances. Today, after the heron incident, you sprinkle crushed garlic at the edge of your field. Not because you believe it works, but because everyone else does. And standing out here is dangerous. Not just socially, spiritually. A cursed field isn't just unlucky, it's contagious. The line between farming and faith is blurry. Every time you bend down to dig, you wonder who else is watching. The god of the soil, the spirit of your grandfather, that nosy temple apprentice who insists on inspecting your ditches at random. You once found a tiny figurine buried at the edge of your lot, a hippo with human legs. You took it to the priest. He frowned and said it was an ambiguous omen. You asked if you should burn it or keep it. He shrugged and charged you a small fee to neutralize the ambiguity. You buried it again, deeper this time. You haven't told anyone. Later that week, your ox tripped over a beetle. Everyone said it was connected. You still don't know how. So yes, before you plant, you check the stars. You listen for unusual bird calls. You ask your wife about her dreams. You leave a spoonful of honey by the field, just in case the gods are feeling snacky. Because farming here is more than knowing when to sow and reap. It's about who's watching, and whether they approve, and whether the goose you threw a sandal at 3 weeks ago was secretly a divine messenger. You still feel kinda bad about that one. You dig and dig and dig some more. By now, the calluses on your palms are thicker than the soles of your sandals. Your back aches like you've slept on bricks for a century. Which is fair, your bed is bricks, if you're honest with yourself. But the pain doesn't matter, the sun doesn't care, and the field is waiting. You lean into your hoe, an awkward, lopsided thing carved from acacia wood and capped with chipped copper. It's older than your youngest child, and it creaks like it's gossiping about you behind your back. The soil is stubborn today, too dry in patches, too clumpy in others. You curse softly. You strike something hard, not a rock, something smoother. You crouch, brush the dirt away. It's a shard of pottery, still painted with a spiral design, probably a bowl from some long-dead peasant's kitchen. You pause. You wonder who it belonged to, what they carried in it, whether they too tripped over the same ox you now own. You keep digging. You strike something else. A bone. It's not animal, human maybe, just a finger. You stare for a beat longer than necessary, then toss it aside. Not in fear, just fatigue. There are bones everywhere in this soil. Pieces of forgotten people, crumbled utensils, abandoned amulets. A past you didn't ask to inherit, but that clings to your ankles anyway. Historians still debate whether Egyptian fields were regularly worked over burial grounds, or if these scattered remains were just a byproduct of thousands of years of reusing the same land. You don't debate. You just try not to think about the fact that you're growing lentils where someone else once lost a toe. Sometimes you imagine the land remembers, that every swing of your hoe stirs ghosts who sigh softly into the dust, that every crack in the field is an old whisper. You don't say this out loud, your cousin would make fun of you, but you still hum a little tune while you work, just in case someone, something, is listening. You step on a sharp flint, swear, hop around on one foot. Your wife calls from the hut. You found another ghost rock? You say yes. She tells you to stop bleeding on the onions, and then the rain comes. Or worse, the wind. Desert wind isn't the gentle breeze of poems. It's sand in your ears, your eyes, your breakfast. It strips the moisture from your lips and replaces it with the taste of limestone and regret. Your field turns white at the edges, like it's being erased. You cover what you can. You curse the rest. A gust knocks over your last good basket. The ox tries to chase it. You try to chase him. You both fail. That night you sit outside and pick grit out of your teeth. You sip warm beer, chew on dry radish, and stare at the stars. You think of those fields of Iru the priests talk about, the mythical afterlife for the virtuous farmer. Eternal harvests, no blisters, grain that bends willingly, beer that never runs out, and no overseers. But then you glance at your real field, messy, lumpy, full of ghosts, and strangely, it's yours. You know every weed by name. You know which corner drains too fast, which patch grows funny onions, which furrow your ox refuses to walk straight through. You buried your old sandals at the north edge last spring. You marked your daughter's height on a brick near the canal. You caught your first fish here. You buried your father's tools nearby, beneath a fig tree. This field isn't just work, it's memory. You drag your fingers through the dirt and find another fragment of something. Maybe a bead, maybe a tooth. You don't stop to ask which. You just keep digging, because that's what you do. And tomorrow you'll dig again. Maybe in better weather, maybe not. Maybe this time you'll find something alive in the soil, like a dream. Or another chicken bone. Hard to say. You finally get ahead. Not by much, just a little. A good harvest, fewer locusts than expected, and your ox hasn't keeled over in 2 weeks. For once, your grain store isn't whispering famine. You've patched your roof, swapped some onions for honey, and even managed to carve a toy for your youngest. A wooden cat with one leg slightly longer than the other. It falls over constantly. The child loves it, and then the temple arrives. Not in full procession, no incense, no symbols, just a man in pale linen with well-manicured fingernails and an expression like he just stepped in goose droppings. He greets you with formal politeness and immediately asks, "Do you have a donkey?" You pause. You do. A sturdy, bad-tempered thing named Mehi who kicks when nervous and bites when bored. The temple man nods solemnly. The gods require him. You try to protest carefully. For how long? He shrugs. For as long as is necessary. Which, translated from temple speak, means don't expect to see him again. You smile because that's safer than frowning. Mehi gets led away with a rope and a handful of dates. You watch them vanish between two palms and feel like you've just handed over your left leg. And it's not just donkeys. The temple may borrow your tools, your grain, your son for ritual errands, or your wife's best jug. Last year, they took your cousin's loom for ceremonial banner weaving. It returned broken with 3 strands of goose feather woven in and a note that simply read blessed. He still complains about it every solstice. Historians still argue whether temples functioned as sacred centers of community or bureaucratic black holes with incense. You think the answer is yes. The gods need many things. Unfortunately, they often need your things, but you can't say no. The temple speaks for the divine. To refuse a request is to risk offending a deity. And as everyone knows, angry gods can ruin your crops, sour your beer, or give your ox fleas. You've seen it happen. Probably. So you give. You smile. You say thank you for the honor. 2 days later, a priest's assistant shows up. Young, sunburned, overly eager. He brings a basket and a request. Could your wife please bake 4 loaves for the festival of Satis? The festival's in 2 days. You've already used the last of your yeast, but you say yes. Of course, anything for Satis, goddess of the floodwaters and last-minute catering. While your wife grinds grain, the assistant offers spiritual advice about your fields. I saw a snake in the road this morning, and he says, perhaps you should plant your next batch further west. You nod thoughtfully. You do not move your field. Later, you joke to Beck that if the temple keeps borrowing like this, one day the gods will need your sandals. Beck doesn't laugh. He once lent a goat for a fertility ritual. It came back with a painted tail and a limp. You know what's strange? You don't even hate the temple. They throw good festivals, they provide herbal medicine, scrolls, sometimes shelter during floods. Their music is beautiful, flutes and drums echoing across the fields at dusk, and their processions, with golden barks and flower petals, and priests swaying under linen canopies, are the closest thing to magic you'll ever see outside your own dreams. But still, every time a temple visitor walks up the path to your home, your stomach clenches. Because whatever piece you've built, whatever tiny advantage you've scraped together, is suddenly on loan. The following week, you get your donkey back. You didn't expect it. Mehi looks thinner, slightly more traumatized, and adorned with a faded blue ribbon tied to one ear. Your daughter says he looks holy. You think he looks tired. He walks into the yard, farts loudly, and headbutts the ox. Just like old times. That night, as your family sits around a lantern and eats lentils out of shared bowls, your wife turns to you and says, "The priest said our offering last month secured another year of flood protection." You nod. You don't believe it. Not fully. But the river hasn't risen too high, your ditches still run, and for the first time in many months, you don't feel behind, just tired. deeply tired, but safe. For now, you don't see the wars, you just see the weeds. But they're connected. Your blisters, your broken sandals, your backache, and the grand, blood-soaked battles carved into palace walls hundreds of miles away. That's the part no one tells you. While the generals fight with chariots and bronze, it's your wheat that it keeps the empire marching. You wake up and haul water. Somewhere out there, Egyptian troops are marching toward Libya. You clear irrigation ditches. Someone is building a fortress near the Red Sea. You pull up an onion the size of a baby's fist. That onion might end up mashed into porridge for a soldier stationed so far away. He's never even seen the Nile. You've never been to Memphis or Thebes or even further down the canal than the next village. But your grain has. So have your taxes. So has your donkey, now technically a war veteran after his brief temple service. Historians still argue whether Egypt's peasant farmers understood the scope of the empire they fed. You think that's kind of cute. You don't have time to think about scope. You think about drainage. Still, every now and then, a stranger passes through, a man with darker skin, an unfamiliar accent, carrying goods you've never seen. Ivory combs, dried fish wrapped in the palm bark, copper bangles. He trades fast and disappears faster. You watch him go and realize, oh, the world is bigger than your ditch. You've heard whispers of battles in Kadesh, of pharaohs returning with gold and slaves and wheels full of spears. You picture war the only way you know how, like plowing, but louder, with more yelling and worse sandals. Meanwhile, you're battling your own war. The wind shifted this morning, bringing fine desert sand that scours your throat and crusts your eyes. The palm fronds outside your hut rattle like bones. You cover your grain pots and pray the wind dies down before it chokes your sprouting barley. You remember the old man, Beck's grandfather, who used to call the desert the sleeping god. He said it rolled over sometimes, and when it did, whole fields vanished. He wasn't entirely wrong. 2 seasons ago, a sandstorm buried the southern canal overnight. You dug for 2 days to find the mouth again. Your knees still haven't forgiven you. The thing about sand is that it doesn't knock. It just arrives. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to live somewhere green all year, where the soil isn't on loan from a temperamental river, and the sky doesn't try to kill you. But then your wife reminds you that those places probably have even worse geese. So you stay. And besides, Egypt is great. You've heard it said, the heart of the world, the breadbasket of the base, all of it true, just not for you, not directly, because your Egypt is weeds. They sprout like lies in a politician's prayer. They twist around your beans, choke your lentils, and make your ox consider early retirement. You once found a vine wrapped around your sandal in the middle of the night. It felt personal. And while you're hacking at those weeds with a sickle so dull, it might as well be a spoon, the priests are reciting poems about Pharaoh's conquest of the Nubians. You're trying to keep your garlic patch alive. They're celebrating that someone in the palace now owns 10 more gold bracelets. One afternoon, an official from the estate visits. He's accompanied by 2 soldiers and a scribe. They're there to survey productivity. You know this routine. They look at your field, nod solemnly, write something on a scroll and say, "The land is serving Pharaoh well." You want to say, "No, I am," but you smile instead. That's safer. Later, over a pot of date mash, your neighbor whispers that the army might need more grain. The temple has been hinting at a special harvest donation. You both stare at your modest store of wheat and imagine it gone. You don't fight in the wars, you don't wear bronze, but you bleed just the same through your fingertips, through your knees, through every cracked heel that touches this land. Still, you keep planting, you keep digging, because even if no one builds a monument to you, no one carves your name in stone or paints your deeds on a temple wall, your work feeds it all, and that's something. Maybe not glory, but something real. You die in debt, not dramatic debt, not temple curse, public flogging, shouted down the street debt. Just quiet, invisible debt. The kind that grows season by season, like mildew in your grain pots, slow, sour, and hard to scrub out. It started with a bad flood 3 years ago, washed out half the field. Then came the locusts, the ox injury, your second son's broken arm. The barley harvest dipped. The temple didn't adjust your tax quota, and so you borrowed. 1 sack of emmer from the neighbor, 2 from the estate, a pot of dried beans from the temple reserve, with a return clause that might as well have been written in crocodile. You swore you'd pay it back. You tried. You even sold that extra mat your wife had woven, the nice one with the dyed fringe. But here you are now, staring at the ceiling of your hut, listening to your own breathing grow thinner. Your oldest daughter is spooning date pulp into your mouth. You don't taste it. You smile anyway. Your youngest is playing with a clay cat near the door. Mahi the donkey is sleeping just outside, for once not farting. You feel your limbs grow heavy. Your eyes go soft. The last thing you hear is your wife saying, "We'll manage." And then, nothing. Historians still argue whether death was feared or embraced by ancient Egyptians. You'd say both. There's grief, sure, but also preparation. You've had a small burial cloth stored for years, just in case. Your wife's already washed it. Your daughter is practicing the funeral wail. It's off-key, but she means well. Your children inherit your field. That's the good news. The bad news? They also inherit your debt. Because land here isn't just soil, it's responsibility. The scribes know who lived where, who owed what, who forgot to return a borrowed plow 3 decades ago. There are scrolls, so many scrolls. Your name is there, scratched in fading ink, probably misspelled. Your wife visits the temple, leaves a small offering. She tells the priest you were a good man. The priest nods, offers her a payment plan. It includes interest. It always includes interest. Meanwhile, your funeral is modest. No golden sarcophagus, no parade of mourners, just a few neighbors, a mound of dirt, and a short prayer recited half from memory, half from creative guesswork. The priest forgets your name once. Someone corrects him, he shrugs. But your tomb painting, that's where the magic happens. You'd saved a little, just enough to hire a local artist. He didn't know you well, but he listened. You told him you wanted cows, not statues, not battles, just happy cows, and maybe a fat field of grain. So that's what he painted. Wide green pastures, plump cattle, a shining canal. You in the center, grinning like a pharaoh on festival day, holding a golden sickle and standing suspiciously upright for a man with chronic back pain. Your wife cries when she sees it. Your daughter says, "You never smiled like that in real life." Your son adds, "The cows are too clean." But they smile too. You are gone, but your work remains. The field doesn't rest. It can't afford to. The barley still needs sowing. The ditches clog, the ox limps. The same birds come back, peck at the same corners. Your wife steps into your sandals, metaphorically and literally. They still fit. She shoulders the hoe. She shouts at the donkey. The children help. or try to. And when the scribe returns, asking if the family plans to maintain their tribute level, she nods. Firm, tired, brave. Later that evening, your oldest lights a small lamp, sets it in the corner of the hut. For father, she says. No one speaks for a while. Then the dog farts and everyone groans. Life goes on. You're not buried in gold. You don't have statues. But the land remembers. It holds the shape of your knees, the groove of your plow. The broken tool you left behind and never got around to fixing. You were never famous, but every dynasty you fed, every priest who praised a flood, every soldier who marched with bread in his pack, walked on your labor. You are gone, but not forgotten, especially by the soil. You're not here anymore, but your footprints are. Worn into the clay, pressed into canal banks, etched into the wood of the doorframe, your children still brush past every morning. Your sandals, those patched and repatched scraps of woven palm, are hanging on a peg in the corner, still caked with the last dirt you walked through. Your daughter keeps the hut swept. She grows onions where you once spilled barley. The ox, miraculously, is still alive, though he mostly naps and swats flies now. Mehi the donkey has become weirdly affectionate in his old age, nudging everyone like a priest demanding offerings. The goose still visits. No one knows why. Maybe she misses yelling at you. The village goes on. The sun rises, the Nile breathes, the soil wakes and stretches and swallows seed. The same complaints, the same small joys, the same jokes passed down with slight variations. Don't trust a man with a dry sickle. Never plant before the ibis flies north. The temple always takes the best onions. And your field? It still grows. A little patch of green in a sea of dust and survival. A place that knows you even if no one else remembers your name in 2 generations. Your son carves new tools, better ones. Your widow patches the roof with woven mats in the style your grandfather taught you. One of your grandchildren builds a scarecrow that looks suspiciously like a drunken priest. It works better than expected. Sometimes walking home from the canal, they pass the fig tree, the one near the edge. The one you never cut, no matter how much shade it stole. They don't know why, but they don't touch it. And beneath that fig tree, the tools you buried still sleep. Historians won't write about you. The scribes will lose your tax records in a flood. No statue will bear your likeness. No songs will carry your name. But the land knows. Because when the Nile rises, it tastes the edges of your old furrows. When the sun sets, it slides over the same patch of earth you once knelt in, forehead resting against the handle of a dull hoe. And when the wind comes, soft, hot, full of silt and sighs, it moves the reeds in a way that almost sounds like a voice, not words, just the rhythm of work, of planting, of breathing, of being alive here, once. Wind down, 300 words. Let your breath slow now. Picture yourself at the edge of the Nile, late evening, warm dust rising from the day's work. The reeds are swaying gently in a breeze that smells like water and clay. The light is golden, thick, quiet. You're sitting beside a field that's just been sown, rows neat and hopeful, tiny seeds tucked into earth like secrets waiting to bloom. Behind you, the village murmurs, laughter, cooking pots clinking, someone arguing gently about where to put the goat. But none of it pulls at you. The work is done for now. Your muscles ache, but it's a soft ache, the kind that says, you did enough. You lean back on your palms. The soil beneath you is still warm from the sun. The sky darkens slowly, stars peeking through in pairs and clusters, each one familiar, each one a good watching from a respectful distance. You don't need to pray. You're already here, already part of it. A bird calls out once, then silence. The fig tree rustles, and in that stillness, you feel something settle. Not just dust, but peace, deep earned peace. The kind that comes only when you've given all you had to give. And the world, this strange, sun-soaked, sacred world, says, I saw you, sleep now, farmer of the Nile. Your field is safe.